Welcome, everybody. I am very excited to be joined for, I'm going to call it an extra special event today, something a little bit outside of our normal wheelhouse. If you've been paying attention and involved in our curriculum and programs, we do a lot of things about running startups, Delaware C Corp, stock options, fundraising, exciting stuff like bookkeeping and whatnot. And we get questions all the time from people in various industries. How does this apply to hard tech startups? What about a pharma company? What about consumer packaged goods? And we're experts on kind of running companies of any color, but what we are not experts on is in specific industry verticals. And today I am joined by two people from the Space Foundation to specifically talk about the space economy. We have Kelly and Sasha here, who, Kelly, I believe you are the VP of Space Commerce and Entrepreneurship at the Space Foundation, and Sasha is a program manager of the Space Commerce Institute. So if you've never even heard those terms or wonder what space commerce is as a role, you're going to learn a lot about it today. And not just because it's interesting and because space excites us all. We're entrepreneurs, we're into technology, we're into cutting edge things, but often, people think certain things are outside of their domain in terms of like, oh, if I'm running a consumer packaged goods company or I'm trying to build, IT devices and whatnot, like I'm not an astronaut. I don't fly into rockets, and I'm not Elon Musk and putting satellites into space. But that doesn't mean actually the space economy is not relevant to your company. It might actually be strategically interesting and something that you can expand to and something you can maybe leverage in a way that you never really thought of. And we're all about innovation. We're all about, business model innovation. Marketplace innovation is one of the coolest things that startups really tend to push together. And so today we're going to run through a lot of different things, starting really broad about how your startup can actually leverage the space economy, and then even go into some cool programs that are coming up run by the Space Foundation in conjunction with the Levan Center down in South Florida. If you're in South Florida, you've probably gotten emails from me in the last year about the Levan Center and their programs. That's because they have some really cool stuff down there. So I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to hand this over to Kelly, who's got a good presentation for us. We actually have a cool video and then some details from Sasha. Please post in the chat, be as active as you want to. Tell us your startup name, where you're coming from, your thoughts on space and how it would apply to you. And also use the Q&A. We're going to keep this as casual as we can. So, ask questions, use the Q&A. I'll surface them up to Kelly and Sasha as they're appropriate. And then we'll save some time in the middle and at the end for anything as well. So I'm going to shut up. Kelly, please take us away.
Thank you, Ryan. I really appreciate being here. And I'm looking at the chat. Hi to Italy and Crispin and Dee. Sasha and I are actually originally SoCal natives. We both live in DC now, but you're representing our home territory, which is fantastic. I am very excited to come and talk to you today, and particularly around a lot of the points that Ryan touched on. We, within space, every industry applies, which is probably a very misunderstood concept, but also something that we really dive into and teach at Space Commerce Institute. So as Ryan mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Space Commerce and Entrepreneurship at Space Foundation. What that actually means is I developed and launched an initiative called Space Commerce Institute a year and a half ago. And what we do is we focus on growth into and growth within the space economy. So one of the things that I realized, having been in this industry for a very long time, is that we talk to ourselves all the time. We'll throw out lofty numbers and statistics and acronyms, and it doesn't necessarily make sense to people who don't understand what it means for them in their business, or even how to take advantage of it. And so that's actually the goal of today's presentation. I'm going to give you a little snippet of what I call the Space Economy 101. This is just a portion of a much broader conversation. We only have an hour today, and I do want to leave some time for Sasha and Yop to be able to talk about some of the tangible programming. But after this, if there are questions, and I'm happy to engage on any level. So as a top level thought, we always say that there is no better time to become part of the global space ecosystem. And really what's exciting about this moment in space, because it is a different moment, we always joke that it's not your grandfather's space industry, is it's moving really fast and it's becoming extremely broad. And really then benefiting from this vibrant industry requires reimagining the space economy itself. We are extremely fortunate to live in a time where the moon and Mars are no longer a wish, they are a fact. And while we still have a very long way to go to build out our ultimate vision for the space economy and really what interplanetary exploration looks like, where we are rooted now is building that future, and it's benefiting from that future. And so one thing that we always say at Space Foundation is that there is a place for everyone in space. And that is whether you're in more traditional verticals that people think of, such as launch and satellites and telecommunications, broadband, IT infrastructure, kind of all the things enabled by space or enabling space. But really what gets me excited are the emerging space adjacent markets. That's a term that I love talking about, but it's really talking about agriculture, climate surveillance, pharmaceuticals, Ryan, which you mentioned, biotech, healthcare, energy, AR, VR. So all of these industries that are going to be really critical to growing and sustaining what we want space to be. So the goal of this is to get you to understand how your idea, background, interest fits within the future of space, so that you can start to think about a strategy thoughtfully and also what your insertion point looks like. And so I'm going to talk at a high level what the space economy is, what the opportunities are available. And then, as Ryan mentioned, I do encourage Q&A and conversations. So please, if you have any questions, you can jump in the middle of the conversation. I know, Ryan, you'll let me know, and we also will reserve Q&A for the after part. So let me share my screen so you can see what I'm talking about. So that's who we are. So as a guiding principle, and these are some things that I just like to give because it helps people really think about space in an interesting way. We are really only limited by our creativity and imagination and how to take advantage of opportunities. There is no shortage of strategic vision in space, which is fantastic. It's just the goal then is to figure out where you fit within the ecosystem. And so a few guiding principles that I always like to define why space is a good entrepreneurial focus are these. The first is that space is no longer a prospect just for companies led by tech experts or space enthusiasts. And every day, an increasing amount of disparate industries are now recognizing that the gap precluding them from entering the global space market is getting smaller and smaller by the day. This is being done by, the proliferation of launch. Everybody knows who Elon Musk and SpaceX is, and they have almost cracked the code on making launch reliable, routine, cheap, all of the things that we would need to give people access to space that they've never had before. The second, and this is really an exciting one, is that the global space ecosystem has really created new channels for commerce to flow and for business to be done, and has become this pioneering home for new products, services, and approaches that are really redefining critical infrastructure while also creating new jobs and benefiting more life than ever before. One of the things that I always tell people is that while your mind collectively goes to this esoteric, right, people living on Mars and all of these other things, the proxy of reaching for space, because space is difficult, because space has resources, because space has really smart people cracking these, you are going to get these secondary and tertiary effects that are going to flow down that help people in other industries. LASIK surgery, baby food, super soaker, these are all very non-space technologies that came from space technology. So by doing space and doing hard things, you're going to create other products and services. Another one, which is a really interesting statistic, is that the space economy today is actually 55% higher than just a decade ago. So it is continuing to have this incremental and exponential growth. And what that means is that it's producing more entrepreneurial opportunity than ever before. But what I find more interesting is that the parameters of the space ecosystem have expanded. So what I mean by that is that it has been diversified by players, it's been diversified by investment, and it's been diversified by funding interest. In 2021, there was about $20 billion of private investment in space ventures. But over the past 15 years, what they're investing in has been diversified. So if you know a little bit about space orbits, and we'll get into it a bit in the presentation, but traditionally geostationary orbit is where, until Starlink, all of our satellites were. That is where most of the investment lied. But in the past couple of years, we've now seen investment go toward low Earth orbit, which is only 62 miles up and starts there, medium Earth orbit, as well as geostationary orbit. And part of the reason around that is that low Earth orbit is now being seen as this place for a lot of business opportunities. There are going to be commercial space stations that are going to be coming online to replace the International Space Station. What's interesting about those is that it's going to take on the research and manufacturing that NASA is currently doing on the ISS, but it's also going to allow private companies and private citizens to rent space on board to conduct their own experiments. So really the sky is the limit in terms of whatever you can do. And then lastly, the economy, and because of all these areas, has really made room for a diverse group of people with different aptitudes and backgrounds and interests and skills. And so when I think about the future of space, it really is going to require the passion, innovation, and imagination of a lot of different backgrounds and skill sets to grow and sustain the future. So as a top line, I just want you to know that there is opportunity and there is a place for you. So what is the space economy, if you think about it? So the space economy is really three things. It is everything that physically goes into space. So we can conceptualize what that is. It's everything that supports the systems and operations in space. So I touched upon those a bit, but it's, telecommunications, broadband, hardware, fleet maintenance, manufacturing of rockets, sort of that whole ecosystem that surrounds it. And then all of the terrestrial economic activities, so earthbound human activities that are directly enabled by space. So if you think of your cell phone, this has about 13 to 14 space technologies in it, just to create the cell phone. And then all of the apps that you use are actually enabled by space data and by satellite communication. So when you start to think about the trickle-down effect of what space touches, it really is this ubiquitous backbone that enables sort of everything we do on a daily basis. And if we want to quantify it, because I know we have lots of business folks and investors and entrepreneurs, and we love quantification. So the global space economy right now is valued at 1 trillion plus by 2040. And this has been by all of the major banking houses. This number fluctuates between 1 trillion and 3 trillion. I think anytime you get into the trillions, it's sort of a rounding error, right? It is what it is, yeah. But what's exciting about this number is that we are already over halfway there. So this week has been a very big week for the Space Foundation because we put out our space economy number, which is generally one of the widely cited and used quantifications of what the space economy is worth. And we do it in a year back because we can only quantify data on the year back. So in 2022, the space economy came in at $546 billion, which is an 8% growth from the year before. What's interesting about this is that beyond the numbers growing, the excitement that I see more of is the number of players growing. So there are roughly about 80 global space programs. And the reason I say roughly is some countries don't directly report whether they have a space program or not. I'm sure you can read between the lines on that. However, this accounts for known agencies such as NASA, ESA, the Chinese Space Agency, others, as well as any national security programs that exist globally. But beyond that 80, there are 92 countries that are operating in space. And this is actually what I see as kind of the more exciting trend. So we are starting to see a lot of these nascent countries that necessarily haven't had a space strategy put together a space office that might be an extension of their trade commission, or it might be part of their government entity. Sometimes it's staffed by 2 to 4 people. But what it shows is that space is becoming a strategy geographically wide, and they're realizing that there are ways to take advantage of the localities and the brain trust and the industries that already exist to then grow into the future of space. One other thing I'll say about the quantification, because I think it's worth mentioning, is that this $546 billion number, what that is made up of is it's 78% commercial revenue. So any of these commercial companies that are putting it out, creating products and services, and then the 22% is global government spending. So you can start to see this dichotomy of commercial revenue is really outpacing what the government is spending. However, they are very intrinsically intertwined in terms of how they interact, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And then diving a bit further, what are really the two main market distinctions? And this is important to think about because different businesses fit into different ones. So there are really two. There is the space to Earth market and the space to space market. So the space to Earth market are goods and services produced in space for use on Earth. So this includes everything from telecommunications, your internet infrastructure, weather data, GPS, national security satellites, and then technologies derived from space investment and R&D not in space related fields. So as I mentioned to you, memory foam mattresses, actually invisible braces came from space technology as well. So all of these trickle down effects of a transfer of the technology itself into an adjacent market, or the processes to be used in other ways. And then there's the space to space market, which are goods and services produced in space for use in space. This one is the more future oriented and exploratory one. This is also the one that most people are excited about, because this is when we start to talk about the moon, we talk about asteroid mining, launching capabilities to maneuver from one orbit to another, construction of space habitats, refueling depots, etc. What's interesting about this market is that it catches headlines and investment because it's exciting, it's sexy, it's what we think about the future of space. But this is the market that's also in its infancy to get off the ground. And the reason for that is there are some significant technical achievements that need to be accomplished for this sector to thrive. One of the examples that I always use is, how do we power things in space? So if we want to, have full-scale colonies on the moon, if we want to drill on an asteroid, how do you power that? We have electrical outlets on Earth, but what does that look like in space? That's a fundamentally technological challenge that needs to be cracked to enable a bunch of other opportunities. What I love about the space-to-space market, though, is that this is what really pushes the boundaries and the limits of what is possible. This is driving significant investment, trial and error, a lot of people with limitless intelligence really wanting to build this future. And so because of that, we will create better processes, components, and other technological advancements that come with it. But to be prosperous truly right now from a business opportunity, we need to view space through the lens of Earth, and that is the space to Earth market. And what's interesting about the space to Earth market is that that currently accounts for 95% of the ROI in the space industry. So you can understand why when I talk about things like telecommunications and broadband and internet streaming services, satellites, all those things, but it's also a lot more deeper than that, because this is where it starts to get into a lot of the space adjacency. So the utilization of satellite data has been used to track things like environmental conditions and other things. So Ryan, I know that you're based in New York, and anybody who's kind of in our area and in DC in particular, we had really bad air quality because of the fires in Canada, right? And we were able to then go on an app and be able to track whether it was safe and what it's not safe. That's utilizing space-based technology. The other thing too is that the environments and conditions of space are also really uniquely suited to being able to manufacture and research applications that are not applicable on Earth. So for example, some things that have happened in space is they've manufactured medical devices with the size and sophistication to be able to implant on someone's retina. They have also advanced osteoporosis treatments to help prevent the muscle and bone atrophy. And because of that research, they were able to actually be able to fast track FDA approval on Earth. What's also interesting that they've been able to do is they've been able to develop different super alloys that are durable and stable enough for applications in nuclear power reactors and rocket engines. But it's because they have these clean environments and different environments that enable people to do it. Another example that I always like to say, because it's fun and it's different, is Doubletree Hotel, if you guys know who they are. So they, if you've ever stayed at one, they give you cookies, right? They give you chocolate chip cookies or oatmeal cookies. They can technically claim that they are the first space hospitality company, because they partnered with a company called NanoRacks, and they shot an oven into space and baked some of their cookies and brought them back down. Another fun example is that there is a company in Bordeaux, France, who actually sent 12 bottles of Bordeaux and put them on board the International Space Station for all you wine drinkers. And they aged them in space on the International Space Station for 12 months because they wanted to see if the lack of gravity and the radiation on the space station would age the grapes in a way that is different. I'm happy to report that the wine got a good review. It did not get the same sort of praise as what had been aged for maybe like 25 years. But those bottles, if you're interested, are available for $1 million on Christie's. So if you want to buy them in an auction, feel free to do so.
Can I interrupt you real quick, Kelly? Because we had a relevant question before you jump.
Yeah.
That 1 trillion projection for the market cap, does that include the market cap of companies? Like SpaceX is already worth, this is from Praveen in the Q&A, if SpaceX is already worth $100 billion, is that 10% of that?
Yes. So this is the challenge. SpaceX like skews the numbers a lot, right? Because they are such a behemoth of a company, that they do make up a large chunk of it. There is some quantification that is like, if you could parse out SpaceX being able to be able to look at the totality of the ecosystem. But right now, generally, because they are part of it, and they also have, the government is actually a main customer of theirs too. While they're private, they interact with the government a lot. So that commercial government dichotomy does include them.
One thing that
That is a great question, because we often have to sit there and we're like, yeah, SpaceX, and you can't actually have a conversation about the space economy with them coming up at least once, twice, three times, which is necessary.
I think it's worth noting that it enables a lot of other young companies to exist without their own launch costs, which means that you have a lot of other kinds of industries that are brought in because of what SpaceX is able to do. So I thought I'd chime in.
Space as a service.
Yes, that is actually the perfect segue into what I'm about to talk about here. So thank you, Sasha. So to dive a bit deeper, so we talked about the why and that it's a ripe opportunity and really what the numbers are, but let's talk about what technically needs to happen to unlock these type of opportunities. So the first that we always talk about is low Earth orbit, because like I said, it's very near to us. I like this chart because it shows you essentially where the different orbits, lie. Low Earth orbit starts 62 miles up and it goes to about 1,200 miles. So it's very much, when you can see on here where the International Space Station is, there's a lot of commercial activity. What's interesting about low Earth orbit activity is beyond what happens on the International Space Station, this is actually the market that is starting to see a lot of small sats come to bear. An interesting statistic about the satellite proliferation over the years and the satellite boom, quite frankly, is that up until 2020, there were about 2,500 satellites that existed in space. Between 2020 and 2022, that doubled to 5,000. And they're now saying that in the next 10 years, we could get up to 100,000 satellites, which is wild. And those are going to be spread between low Earth orbit and geostationary orbit, of course, but that is a lot of new satellite technology. It's a lot of opportunity to capitalize on the data. It also creates other challenges, which we will get into later. But it is a big focus in the area. What's also growing opportunity within low Earth orbit is suborbital flights, so space tourism, which I'm sure that you all are very aware of with, Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin and SpaceX as well. What also happens here is remote sensing and satellite analytics. We already talked about this in terms of like climate monitoring apps, observations. And then the commercial space stations, which I mentioned, but that is really going to open the aperture for a lot of people to take advantage of space. So while this is a growing and vibrant marketplace ripe with opportunity, there are really 5 technical challenges that must be overcome in order to open up business in low Earth orbit. And Sasha mentioned this, it is the launch equation. So if we are really going to open up opportunity, launch needs to be 4 things. It needs to be reusable. So we need to be able to extend a vehicle's lifespan. Up until recently, a lot of rockets were one use, but now being able to launch, come back, allows, it cracks a manufacturing code, but then it also allows less turnaround time to actually repair and redo. It needs to be reliable. So really lowering the risk associated with each launch and each subcomponent of the rocket. So obviously reliability applies to any sort of human tourism, spaceflight, but really in terms of your payload. So if you're a company and you want to put something in space and your payload is expensive and your business operations and your client is dependent on it, you want to make sure that the rocket's not going to explode with everything that you have on board. So that's a big one. It needs to be routine. So companies need to really be able to make plans on routine schedules and have quick turnaround times. Up until SpaceX, actually, the quickest rocket turnaround time was 1 to 3 years. Like it was a very long time. Elon has really turned it into about 1 to 3 months. What we need to be able to do is get it to about 1 to 3 days. So we need to be able to have rockets that is as routine and ubiquitous as getting on an airplane for us, being able to buy a ticket if it goes on time, which generally airlines are having issues now. However, know that your flight's going to go off and it's going to get there. The last piece in this, which is actually kind of people don't think is difficult, but is really difficult, is the issue of re-entry. So anything that you want to retrieve up and do research up needs to come down. That is really hard. And so there are a lot of companies that are working to crack that code. But once the launch equation is realized, that is going to open up a plethora of opportunities. And we will get into some of those when I get into the market drivers in the next section. The next orbits in altitude are medium Earth orbit and geostationary. And really what this is going to require is untethering from the Earth's surface. So instead of having to rely on Earth and rockets to ship things up and back, we need to be able to manufacture in space. We need to be able to launch from commercial space stations, launch from other paths. So taking Earth out of the equation is really going to enable a lot of commercial activity in these areas. And then lastly, when I talk about beyond, so really this is, Moon, Mars, and beyond. For any of you who might have been monitoring space vernacular, so the term cislunar applies to anything that's between the Earth and the Moon. And then it goes, Moon to Mars is kind of the next vector, and then beyond is what we think about. When we are looking at these sort of operations and what's going to enable the next wave of technologies and business ideas, at this point, technological maturation will probably hit a peak. So in my mind, we will have cracked the technical code. What is really going to be required at this time is things that are going to sustain and help long-term human life support. So human beings are going to be very critical to these sort of missions, and they are going to be spending increasingly long amounts of time in space. They're going to be accessing distant orbits that are going to require, strides in supporting their health and their well-being on these long voyages and in these different hostile environments. And so a lot of the industries that are implicated in this next wave is everything from energy, healthcare, space habitats, and creature comforts. So how do you actually create an environment that keeps people sane and healthy and connected to their families when they're on these large missions? Environmental assessment, how do we actually test the air, test water, I say water, but liquids, soil, anything of that nature. And then agriculture, how do we grow things in space? So everybody thinks of Matt Damon in The Martian and I think it's a potato or whatever he grows, but that's a real thing. Nutrient deprivation, right? I mean, all of these things that you think that are deeply human problems are going to need to be replicated in these environments. And so a lot of the conversations that we get into here are around space medicine. How do you reproduce in space, right? If you have eventual colonies. This area, I always joke, and it's not so much of a joke, but it creates more questions than answers, but that's not a bad thing because we need people to start thinking about this because we will get there, but how do we scale and sustain? And it's deeply, deeply human problems. So before I wrap up and hand it over to Sasha and open it up to Q&A, I do want to briefly go over the 10 economic drivers of the new space economy, and then some technical areas that I see heating up. So what these are is Morgan Stanley, also one of the main, financial houses that gave into that 1 to 3 trillion projection. They really put forth these economic drivers that are growing opportunity. And one of the things that I like to point out for people is that these are notable for their variation as much as they are for their cutting edge positioning. And so as I move through these, I really want you to think about a lot of the downstream capabilities and the technologies that are necessary to execute, grow, and sustain each. I will mention a few of them. And this is really to get you to think about the subcomponents and the industries that you might represent that are very critical to the growth of this vertical. So the first is satellite launch. We know all about this. We know what it is. But some of the things that are going to be relevant to grow and sustain this is energy. So I mentioned, energy before, but propellants, being able to come up with new fuel technologies, new ways to propel these satellites for maneuverability. Digital engineering is another. Everything in space is becoming more critically intertwined. Like it is on Earth, it is in space. So being able to have digital engineering skills, cybersecurity also plays into this, is really critical. And also service and repair. As I mentioned, the satellite market is having this extreme proliferation moment. So being able to repair them and service them is another critical area. Satellite internet, we all know this with Starlink, going back to Elon Musk. But one of the big areas is really around data and data storage. An interesting point is that it has been thought that space data is going to surpass oil and gas in the next 10 to 20 years as the most critical commodity. And the reason for that is that we are going to have so many satellites collecting so much information, but they're only pointed on one particular use case for whatever the satellite operator is pointing to. So if you can come in and capture the data, quantify the data, store the data, and use it in very different use cases for an end user, that is a really, really hot entrepreneurial area. The next is deep space exploration. And so, this looks at Moon and Mars missions, deep space cargo, all of these things. But what is really interesting about this, beyond the human elements like space medicine that I talked about before, but it's looking at studying effects of gravity on the body. There's a company that is currently trying to come up with artificial gravity. So being able to replicate it in some sort of way that they can put on board commercial space stations and others, so that humans can walk around like normal and we don't get the amount of atrophy that you would generally get in space. Food engineers, we mentioned before, agriculture, creature comforts. I can't stress this one enough. Sasha has heard me say this anecdote a lot, but it's really funny to me. They have done in a bunch of different areas, they've simulated Mars missions, and it takes about 7 to 8 months to get to Mars. Within 5 days, the crew turned on each other. There was crew mutiny. And the reason is because you have confined spaces with relative strangers, even though you train to some capacity, but most of these rockets are autonomous at this point. So people are people, right? They're very deeply human problems, but how do you keep people connected? So AR, VR, right? Being able to have environments that might simulate plants in the background, Ryan, like you have, or your pet. I mean, they're very visual, but it does have an effect on your overall mental health. The other thing about this is refueling. So again, as I mentioned a bit, being able to untether from Earth and be able to fuel things in space. And so there are also companies coming up with gas stations in space and refueling depots. Lunar landing is another. Obviously, this is the moon. This is going to be everything from energy, construction, when we actually do the habitats. Robotics and autonomy is really, really critical. So being able to interact with the humans. Agriculture, space medicine, we talked about. Biometrics, another. So being able to track health. AI is really critical for mission planning and mission execution. And then developers and transportation. There's a whole industry now coming out about how do you sell space, right? Like, so real estate people. I mean, it's just a domino effect. And then Earth observation, I won't belabor this point because we talked about it, but this is looking at the utilization of data for other things like wildfires and, storm tracking and agriculture and anything of that nature. The next 5 that we'll talk about are the more fun ones that people sometimes think about. So asteroid mining. What's interesting about asteroid mining is that has gotten a lot of interest from folks because it's really looking at technologies to be able to capture, minerals and other rare earths. Really, the main thing that people want to be able to capture within these asteroids is water, because if you're going to sustain life within space, you might as well be able to extract water from other areas. Well, an interesting thing is that the mining definition has actually shifted because of emerging space resources industry, because traditional mining doesn't necessarily apply to how you would mine in space. And so it's caused the whole industry as a whole to sort of shift their definition of it. And again, the most important thing here is water, but then you also have to consider from a technology solution, how do you store and transport such commodities? I'm sure at some point there will be the person who goes and tries to attach to the asteroid that has been said that has more platinum that exists globally now. That will happen at some point, but that's not what's driving space projections. That's more a want in the future. Space debris, and I will say a bit about this, but I don't want to belabor the point. I mentioned in the beginning that there is this proliferation of satellites, and within the next 10 years, they think there's going to be about 100,000 in orbit. Space is already really congested. There's a lot of space junk. That is the more common term that people throw around. And it's becoming a big issue. It's becoming an issue for being able to launch new things into space, being able to maneuver satellites within space, but also the debris causes real hazardous conditions for people that are in space and a lot of the large scale structures and systems. There are weather events that happen in space just like on Earth. They have their own, firestorms and hurricanes and wild things. And you think about it just in hitting metal shrapnel and throwing it into these really expensive critical infrastructures, which is not great. This is a really budding entrepreneurial opportunity. If you can figure out how to clean up space junk, recycle it within space and use it for other materials, that is really, really big. Space tourism, we know all about that. The thing I'll say is to think beyond the actual launch and think about everything that is required to sustain a tourist industry is going to also sustain that. So hospitality, you know, creation of space suits, selling things on rockets. I know that Blue Origin has an astronaut concierge service. So there's all sorts of things that come around that. Space research is a critical one. This is going to take everything from economists and journalists and media and writers to really tell the space story and why space is a critical infrastructure. And then the last one is manufacturing, which is less looking about traditional manufacturing, because we know what that looks like within the space industry to actually build rockets. But this is looking more at 4D tailoring, so additive manufacturing and replacing parts. So being able to replicate orphan parts that break in space, and it's also looking at ways to miniaturize materials. So making potentially like metals that have the chemical makeup of something but act in a different way. So it's really creative ways to think about those sort of structures. I think this is my last slide. So that is our main email or website. I will drop my email into the chat, and I'm happy to open a conversation. I know we covered a lot in 30 minutes, but really what I want to drive home and what I hope this got you thinking about is there are a lot of really creative use cases in the future of space, and every industry is going to be required for its growth. It's just finding your practical, tangible insertion point, which is a lot of what we do at the programmatic element at the Levan Center, which Sasha will cover later today. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. That was a ton. I'm going to start with some of these questions. We had William Haynes. This was early on. They're in medical devices, and they're interested to hear about how medical devices fit into the space economy. Are there like goals defined around healthcare for long-term space travel, Mars, anything that one could work towards, or do you have to think up everything?
So it's both. If you want to shoot me an email, I'll put my email into the chat. I can send you some resources into who is starting to think about this. So the short answer is yes, and they are thinking about it. So we know that we will get there, but there isn't so much of a path for the full-scale development because they're still trying to develop the technology that's going to be necessary to do it. However, there are some research programs and some others that will help kind of put some parameters around that. The other piece around medical devices, which I'll say though, is if there are things that you've been wanting to do on Earth that you need to come up with different manufacturing abilities to do, the conditions of space, as I mentioned, you could actually design different medical devices with different types of precision in space that will allow you different sort of procedures on Earth. So that one is really kind of a duality. I will say for medical devices, one of the areas that is probably the most like the further along, sorry, it's been a long day, is robotic surgeries. And so being able to really have that combination between AI and actually being able to do robotic surgeries, and some medical devices do play into that. But that is a really emerging area. And yeah, I'll drop my email in, but send me an email. I'm happy to give you resources. Or Sasha, could you drop it in now while I'm answering these questions? Thank you.
And he got specific in saying he's thinking about like the system level of healthcare, like challenges of like not being able to bring every pill necessary on a rocket.
So those conversations are happening. We're actually running a lot of those at the Levan Center. We have a different space medicine roundtable that we run all the time with different physicians that are tackling a lot of those different challenges. And so emerging, yes, nothing concrete yet, but people are realizing it is a thing.
We got Karthik going to hospitality. We actually have two hospitality creature comforts. So Karthik's first is go a little deeper into the space tourism marketing insights.
Yes. So there's a lot of ways you could do this. So all of the companies that are offering space flights or suborbital space flight, they have different, like I mentioned, there's like an astronaut concierge service. That's internal to the company. So when the people pay for their seats, they have this whole curated experience. That experience, I truly believe that when more of those flights are proven to be possible, they're going to become cheaper, and they're going to be a whole industry around them. So I can imagine, external people working with these companies to sell space packages, right? So if they maybe buy a seat on, let's say, Blue Origin, there's probably a company that could give them sort of like a pre-space experience around it. The other thing that I also say is that like seamstresses are going to be really critical, because currently all of the astronauts that go to space have to abide by like really strict medical procedures, right? But you're going to have everyday citizens who can afford to go to space going to space that might not be the most like physically fit. So you're going to have spacesuits that give the aesthetic look of what it means to be a space tourist, because that's super cool, mixed with actually something, yeah, XXL spacesuits, yeah. So just, you know, there's those considerations, but also beyond the flights, when we do make this a reality, people are already talking about space hotels and other things. An example also of one of the wildest ones I heard, but people are getting funding for it, is someone wants to put a museum on the moon, and they want to actually be able to broadcast NFTs from artists down on Earth. I don't know who's going to watch, who's going to see those, but it's got funding. So if you think about like space hotels and other things, like people need to book these trips, right? People need to sustain these trips. There's going to be ecosystems on the ground that give that sort of luxurious experience. So hospitality just continues to spiral.
I guess a post-space experience would probably be the quickest one too, because I imagine re-entry in the day after is not exactly most comfortable human state.
And then media, think about media companies, right? So if a person goes up and maybe they have a GoPro on and they want to be able to do something with their imagery that they did for their own personal branding, a media company will help them do that. I mean, like it's going to be everything.
A real question is it going to cut down on CGI costs for Hollywood just to send a rocket up there?
No more wires.
Really the big questions.
Rosarian asks, similar in the thing, and the XSL spacesuit is hilarious to me. That is a creature comfort. Are there any other ones like that you're excited about or that you've heard about?
About other areas?
Creature comfort or hospitality areas.
Oh yeah, so there was a company that was trying to create these large scale panels, like LED panels or others, to be able to project scenes on Earth. So say you're in your whatever, you're in your dome, or nobody knows what these habitats are going to look like, right? But whatever they are, you could have a large screen that looks like you're out on a forest. Or maybe having some pre-recorded images of your family to make it seem like you're sitting in the living room with them or interacting. I mean, there's a lot of those types of things, just to make it feel more comfortable and more normal.
Awesome. So we have Shani in the chat. This is going to butt up against thermodynamics and the laws of physics, but the possibility or a scope of propulsion without fuel.
Is that a possibility?
Is that a possibility?
So short answer is it's being explored. So there is an entire industry around air breathing rockets. So the way that those generally work, though, is that it does take an amount of fuel and a delta to get it into the atmosphere, and then it can take advantage of atmospheric pressure. But if you want to dive into it's like air breathing, and some of the hypersonics rockets actually do go into that category, but it's being discovered. There's also a couple, this company Spin Launch, that wanted to spin a rocket and shoot it into orbit. So yes, it is definitely, there are people that are looking at these opportunities and problem sets.
That's my favorite launch company.
I remember Spin Launch made big waves like in the last year or something like that. I remember seeing
Sasha loves Spin Launch.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's cool. Praveen asks, is anyone working on day trips to the moon?
Right now? No, not yet. It will be. So some of these hotels, there's also a thing called the Gateway and others. They want to do hospitality in that area, but right now it's mainly in low Earth orbit around these commercial space stations and other suborbital flights. But in the future, probably. I don't know. I don't think it would be a day trip, but
this person is educated. They said 1G acceleration will get you to the moon in 9 hours rather than 3 days. I don't know if we can all take 1G for 9 hours.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot.
All right, let's pause here because we only have 15 minutes left. I know you have a couple other stuff for us.
Yes.
So if you want to roll the clip, and we'll get into the portion.
thank you all. Sasha did drop my email in. Please send me an email. I'm happy to continue these conversations because these are the things that I love doing. So I appreciate your time. And I am going to hand it over to Sasha. But before I do, we are going to roll a video that specifically shows you the program that we are running in Florida, that dives into some of the more tangible ways that you can take advantage of space.
It's exciting to have Level 5 Space Dock. We want people to self-select into the industry and think about how their background, interest, skill set fits, and really to bring their enthusiasm and creativity. And so the goal of what we teach here at the Levan Center is to find that insertion point into the global space ecosystem.
Prior to this program, space wasn't even an option. Now this program has really taught me to think bigger and take advantage of all the opportunity that's waiting in the space economy.
One of the wonderful things that we've been so encouraged about having this programming here is that there are all these industries that have really critical capabilities for space growth and scalability. The opportunities in space are really limitless, and what we are only limited by is our creativity and imagination. And so for participants, they're not only going to understand what opportunities are available, but they're going to know how they're relevant into the future of space.
What it really did was open my eyes to all the possibilities for development for my company.
The program is valuable to get the right resources.
All the instructors were so knowledgeable, and it really gave me an opportunity to help develop my business plan.
So it will cover everything from understanding how to build customers and businesses now, so taking advantage of what space brings to bear at this current time, and then also what's going to be relevant in 3, 5, 7 years. And so it's being able to position yourself in the future, but creating these tangible, practical ways to do it. The problem that the space industry has is we talk to ourselves a lot. We talk in statistics, we talk in acronyms, and it's really difficult for people to decipher what that means for them and their business. And so we want to illuminate the barriers of entry, break through those barriers of entry, and create those viable paths. It's going to take the totality of the community here to really help us build what the future of Level 5 looks like.
I gotta admit, I really love that clip because it sort of gets the appropriate vibe going for me to talk about what exactly we're doing in all of those videos and how you can be part of it. So thank you, Kelly, for playing that. So if you didn't hear at the very beginning, my name is Sasha Kedzie. I am the program manager for Space Foundation, Space Commerce Institute, and today I want to talk about Level 5 Space Dock, which is a really, really great program through the Alan B. Levan NSU Broward Center of Innovation, which if you're in South Florida, you should absolutely check out, not only because of space related things, but also because they're a great resource in lots of other ways. But since I am here to talk about space, let me share with you about Level 5 Space Dock. So let me quickly pull up my presentation. If y'all, thank you for your patience. All right, so got a lot of good things to share with you in the time that we have left. So Level 5 Space Dock at NSU. What are we actually talking about? Level 5 Space Dock is a program that promotes space entrepreneurship by connecting South Florida to the broader space ecosystem. This is a result of a partnership with the Alan B. Levan Center, which is a private-public partnership for this innovation center that is gorgeous. It is 54,000 square feet. It has co-working spaces, meeting spaces, technology certification programs, a cybersecurity range, media production studio, a commercial catering kitchen, if that's your vibe. But what we do for them is that we run Level 5 Space Dock, and we focus on the ways that we can sort of broaden the opportunities for people to find their entry point into space and what that looks like for their particular business to grow and scale into that global supply chain. So we do that in two ways. One of the first is our Spacepreneur program. So we love calling it Spacepreneur, but what we're really talking about are incubators and accelerators, a space business focused cohort for your stage in your founder's journey. So recognizing not everybody, where your startup is now, whether it's just, you know, a prototype or it's something that's more mature and you're already receiving funding, we have different programs that cover, that are able to sort of meet you where you're at and help you make a strategy that makes sense for you. So before I dive into those specific programs, the reason why this exists is because we believe that the opportunities are too great to not consider the space market, and not considering the space market is actually sort of a risk to you, in that there are, as Kelly was talking about, the space economy is expected to reach 1 to 3 trillion by 2040, right? And most recently, we learned yesterday from the space report that was released that last year that industry was at 546 billion. And by not considering a space strategy, you might be missing out on that boom, right? How can your technology and idea apply to the space ecosystem? Second, your technology may be already primed. You heard from Kelly give lots of different examples, from seamstresses to, you know, the more obvious of propulsion, but there's lots of things in between. So if you are somebody who is thinking about high precision manufacturing, or maybe just data science, maybe raw material sourcing or supply chain optimization, agriculture, there are a lot of different ways that your technology could benefit the ecosystem, and the ecosystem can benefit from your technology. And lastly, we believe that, you know, this program is a great way for you to find what that entry point looks for you. So moving on, we have at the sort of beginning stages of your founder's journey, we have a 4-week program. We sort of focus on defining your problem, product roadmap, pitch plan, really starting with the nuts and bolts of like what it means to build a business. We're looking for pre-seed stage companies, and we accept anybody with what we call tech readiness level TRL1 and above. If you're not familiar with what tech readiness level refers to, it is a lovely categorization that describes tech maturity. It was actually created by Dan Golden, if I remember correctly, when he was a NASA administrator. So one being you've observed a particular phenomena and that you think could become something, you know, and then 2 is maybe that you have seen that phenomena and you've been able to recreate it. And then, you know, the mid-levels up to 9 are closer to you have a prototype and you've used it on a particular environment, for example, and, you know, all the way up to 9 that you have a technology that is ready to be deployed and that has been well tested in the field. So this TRL level categorization is easy to Google, and I could have put a little chart on there, but I figured I'll also let you explain it.
I threw the Wikipedia link in there.
I love it. Thank
Ryan
you.
put it into the chat. And one thing I'll just add about the TRL level and why it's relevant and why we use it is that's what the government uses. So it came out, like Sasha said, it came out of NASA. It's what the government and particularly NASA use to evaluate the maturity of a tech for them to invest or use. And now the commercial market has also started to adopt it. So in anything from a tech venture, especially if it's going to interact with the government in some way, you need to know what your TRL is.
Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate that clarification. So knowing where you're at on that categorization is helpful to sort of place you in what particular program you're interested in. So this program, Ideate and Create, is sort of where you begin your journey. You might have an idea that you're thinking about prototyping. You're trying to figure out if there is a clear idea to commercialize. We will help you. Our excellent facilitators and instructors who have been entrepreneurs themselves, who also have backgrounds in the government, have background in private industry. Some of them have background in NASA. You're in good hands. Would help you sort of identify and clarify if what you have can be a kind of technology that could be inserted. So a couple of things to keep in mind is that this is an in-person program. It'll be Tuesdays and Thursdays from 4:30 to 7. We say 4:30, that's when the doors open, but our instructors are there from 5 to 7. So after work, you'd be able to swing by and not only be able to be at the center that has all these really great resources, but also get to know your cohort pretty well. So starting with ideate and create. Next, we have a little further into your journey, a 6-week program that focuses for early stage companies. So at this point, your technology needs to be at TRL level 3 and above. This is a more involved program. You'd be identifying how that your particular company can grow. So at this point, you would need to demonstrate that you have a product that has a realistic possibility of being inserted into the space economy. So, but in the nuts and bolts of what every week looks like, you'd be creating a corporate structure, you'd be talking about sales and marketing, you'd be talking about what that looks like in the space industry. So, for example, for talking about your strategies for growth, recognizing that you're going to likely, not everyone, but likely need a strategy for how you work with government contracts, or are you working with a government subcontractor, or are you going to insert yourself into, a subcontractor, thinking through what that looks like, because the access to capital and funding models are very different. Perhaps maybe you want to talk about SBIR grants, small business innovation research grants, that might be a really great fit where, the government is looking for a particular technology, you have the skills and ability to produce that, and maybe that's really where you should be going next. We sort of help you navigate that sort of complex ecosystem that maybe you might not have as much familiarity with, and so we'd be able to match you with mentors and industry experts and take you to the next level. I think it is also worth noting here that we are accepting applicants for our next cohort, and our applications close on Monday. So I would highly encourage that if you're in South Florida and you think that this is the right program for you, or if you're not sure, feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to have a chat, because there's, Kelly was talking about how you're only limited by your imagination. Maybe we're able to help you imagine what a new application for your technology could look like. So feel free to reach out to myself or Kelly about that. So wanted to make sure to get that plug in there for you. Looking ahead, we have our Accelerate and Scale program. This is a much more hands-on in the sense that it is tailored to the particular startups and businesses that apply and that get accepted, because we would be really looking at your particular offering and how we could help you find funding, find customers, and what your revenue stream looks like. We would probably also talk about, what your network should look like. At that point, we're expecting your tech readiness level to be 5 and above. And this program is Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, also after work. And I'm happy to report that we're doing a program starting in September in the fall. So keep your eyes open, because we have that application open on Gust, and we certainly welcome you to apply. So those are the 3 primary Spacepreneur programs that we do, but we also, for our vision of encouraging space entrepreneurship in South Florida, we recognize that not everybody's an entrepreneur, but maybe curious to understand what that looks like, and maybe, inspire them to think more broadly. And so we have, these are folks that participate in the last cohort, but we do programming and events. And this can look like a lot of different things, but the programs that I wanted to highlight here for you are ones that are coming up. Specifically, we have a space speaker series in which we really do a breakdown of what these space economy looks like at these different levels. This was a 3-part speaker series, so we've completed the first 2, and so we have one coming up next week on deep space, Moon, Mars, and beyond. So you might have heard Kelly refer to, the different orbits beyond Earth and what are the market opportunities there. It would be a deeper dive into that with some additional expertise. We have somebody who helped create the DART program, for example. We have really excellent experts that will be on that panel. And if you happen to be in South Florida, again, I'll plug it. There is going to be a panel discussion followed by a reception. So just wanted to sort of give you an opportunity to participate there. We are also very excited about life on Mars. We are going to be running a Mars habitat simulation experience in which applicants can apply to solve a particular challenge together. We think of it a little bit like a mixture between a simulation and a hackathon without coding, because you will be given scenarios in which thinking about the logistical problems and the like technological problems of what it would look like to have a colony on Mars. And this 72-hour experience would have you in the space working as a team to solve your particular challenge. And so I'm not going to share too much further on that because I know that we're at the top of the hour. But I do want to point out that we're going to have a really fun informational kickoff on September 21st, which is South Florida Space Day, which the center is running. And so this morning I took a screenshot of their website, and so you could see we're already counting down the days. There's going to be a plethora of really great programming talking about a variety of different things. So we're going to have our incubate panel is going to have a pitch session, so you'll be able to hear from companies that went through our program. We're also going to have an opportunity to learn about life on Mars, and a variety of other great things. I'm just going to sort of speed it up here and say that there are a bunch of resources. I'm happy to throw all these on the chat, and how you can reach us, how you can learn about us, how you can apply to our programs, and how you can keep in touch. So I tried to talk fast for everyone's benefit. Thank you so very much for participating. I'm not sure if there are any questions, but I'll go ahead and stop sharing.
We do have some questions, and thank you very much, Sasha and Kelly, again. We do have Yap here from the center, and I think because you mentioned so many things about the physical programming, yes. Yap, if you have a little bit to say about the center, and then Kelly and Sasha, if you have a little bit of extra time, we can maybe get to some of the Q&A after that.
Sure.
Cool.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Away,
my name is Jaap Donat. I'm the Assistant Executive Director for Programs. So I work very closely with Kelly and Sasha on the space side of things. And then I run the regular programs for entrepreneurs that are ready to scale their business. So as mentioned earlier, we're a 54,000 square foot innovation center. Our goal is to help entrepreneurs and their startups with everything they need in one place. So a one-stop shop from programming to wraparound services, which applies to the space program. Mentoring also applies to space programming. Both are free to our participants in the programming. We have meeting spaces, co-working spaces. We run events for entrepreneurs to make sure they connect with the ecosystem. We have large events like Space Day coming up on September 21st, and anything else we can do to help the entrepreneur. We also have technologies, including a cybersecurity range, tech makerspace, a media production studio, and then for some of the programming, the incubate and accelerate have a pitch component, which we do here in our pitch room. So see us as a one-stop shop for entrepreneurs that are ready to scale, solving a major problem using technology, including space related in one space, so that we can assist and grow those startups. And I'm here to help, and I'll put my email address in the chat.
Space in one space. I like it.
Yeah.
All of us have been down to the center one or more times, and it's definitely something to check out and a resource if you're in South Florida or even Southeast United States. Worth a trip. All right, I'll do some rapid fire questions so we don't take too much of your time. We got John Yan here. I'm unfamiliar with Talos. Whether Talos can bring one R&D project apply for the program. Talos is researching a type of blade using a new structure and material. Does that sound familiar to you at all, Kelly?
You're muted.
Nope.
I knew of a different Talos program, which was a combination of a bunch of different tech into a suit, a warfighter suit. I'm not familiar with that one, but send me an email and we can talk offline about that.
Yeah, John, if Talos is your startup, get in touch with them to see if it's a good fit. There's no harm in reaching out. All of these programs are often just looking for the right founders, and they're willing to have the conversations.
Yeah.
Are there any spacepreneur programs you've already answered this. Anything you guys know of in Colorado Springs? Maybe somebody out there?
So we are the division of Space Foundation that does it. We're based in DC, but we execute our programs everywhere. So we are about to run an incubator and accelerator in Houston with the combination of the Italian Trade Agency. We work with different universities to host different things at their like workshops and stuff. So if there are areas in Colorado Springs that you think might need something like this, please connect us and we can bring our programming. We do also have, I dropped it into the chat, our website to Space Commerce Institute. We do have on-demand courses and workshops available that do talk about space business and spacepreneurship, and particularly different areas to help enhance your business idea. And those are available on demand.
Excellent. I think we got the last one here. The Ideate and Create program. Is there one coming up or is that already passed?
Not yet. So we did one already. Our first 2 cohorts that we graduated, one was an Ideate, one was an Incubate. Because we wanted to do the Accelerate this time around, we needed to run an Incubate again to get a couple of more mature companies through. But our next Ideate will most likely be next February, March.
Excellent.
Yeah. So early 2024.
Wonderful. And be on the lookout. Again, you're probably here because of an email from me. I often help promote those programs too for the center and for the foundation. So anything's happening, it should be up. We will send out a follow-up from this event with the recording, with a bunch of these links and resources and stuff. I will try to get that out tomorrow because I know there's a lot of dates that are coming up for that, but that should be coming out from me. And I think we got it. Thank you for the extra 6 minutes. Kelly and Sasha, this was fascinating. I really hope the audience got as much out of it as I do. We'll probably bring you back if you'll have us, because I think this kind of stuff, we've got thousands of people coming onto the platform every month. So there's always kind of a fresh blood of entrepreneurs who, really should consider, all the possible opportunities for their idea and to put their passion towards. So if anybody has any parting words, feel free. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up.
I was just going to say, I appreciate everyone, your interest in sticking around. I really do encourage people to reach out. This is my favorite thing to do. Like, I love my job. And I love working with really brilliant, creative, interesting people and to match them with what I'm seeing in the future of space. So we're very approachable. We love to talk. We put a bunch of resources in there. So please reach out. And, if it doesn't work now for your company, just start to put space in your mind for consideration, because your business will be relevant. And it's a worthwhile strategy to just keep on the back burner.
I think we'll have to consider Gust in space now after this. We have a product called Gust Launch, and it has no rocket component to it whatsoever. Thank you so much, Kelly, Sasha. Yeah, this is fantastic. Have a great rest of your week, everybody. Thanks again.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Bye.